Go, Matt.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's good to be on again, and it's good to be on with the colleagues from around the nation, around the world, as part of the Connections community. Connections has truly become an international community with Connections conferences in the UK, Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, a Serious Games conference / Connections conference in France. We're very lucky to have with us today leaders of 3 of those Connections conferences. I'm going to be uncharacteristically succinct to give them the maximum amount of time. We're going to start with the United Kingdom. Graham is one of 4 folks that helped put together the first of the International Connections conferences. They say in a democracy, the most important election is always the second. And in the case of the Connections going global, it was most important to have that first one. And so that's why I'm asking Graham to speak first about his conference. Then we're going to hear from Swen about the Netherlands, and Rex Brynen will speak on the Connections conference to our great neighbors and friends to the north. So Graham, you're on.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. I'm sharing screen. Merle, could you confirm that you've got the full screen showing Connections UK, please? Silence. Could anyone confirm they're seeing the Connections UK screen? Fantastic. Okay, right. Thank you. In that case, hi everyone. It is really good to be here, and the thanks are entirely, I think, us to you guys for organising this. So Matt asked us all to talk about the origins of our conference, and then the various contributions it's made to defence, to the wargaming community, and then to talk about typical agenda. So I'm going to talk in that order for no more than about 10 minutes, and I'm going to get to the conference that we are going to run this autumn, which for me is almost the most important thing. So the first thing, that slide there just shows you our web page. It is important, and you can see the list of dates across the top. So you can see that our first conference was 2013. Firstly, that is a fantastic repository of everybody who has spoken at our conferences across the years. So I'd make that point. You will see that the aim towards the bottom is to advance and preserve. We all know that, and we absolutely follow that mission. But in terms of where the conference came from, the origins of the conference, I actually just want to tell you a little bit about the people and who we are, because it is, funny old thing, the same story. So that is obviously from our web page, and you'll see we have the organising committee and then the advisory committee. So the story is very, very simple. Back in 2012, a group of leading UK wargamers had been assembled to develop a wargaming system called RCAT, the Rapid Campaign Analysis Toolset. That was led by Colin Marsden. You'll see the middle name, excuse me, from DSTL, and Colin has been absolutely central. So he was leading, he was the technical partner for that project. I was the lead developer. And funny old thing, the kind of people who were involved was Tom Mowat, second name down, and then you'll see Phil Sabin, who I'm sure you all know, in the advisory committee. We were part of the team developing RCAT. And I think in day 1 of workshop 1, I went up to see Phil, who you all know is just, you know, the top of his field, or our field. And I said to him, Phil, where is the equivalent to Connections US in the UK? There must be an equivalent. And I didn't know much about Connections US at that stage. And he said, there is none. There is no conference for professional wargamers. But if you want to get ahead and organise one, crack on. And if you want, you can even host it at KCL. So in that room were Phil, obviously, myself, Tom Mowat, Colin Marsden, and 1 or 2 other people. And we basically looked at each other and shrugged shoulders and said, yeah, all right, let's do it. So we did it. And we had our first conference in 2013. That was with 77 people, I think, including Matt and Peter Perler and Rex and Stephen Downs Martin and all the great and the good. And it has grown from there. As with all of us, just personal effort taking it forward. So in 2019, our last conference, we had upwards of 300, and we did not exceed the fire regulations at KCL. We did not exceed the fire regulations at KCL, but we would do in the future. So that's the story of the conference. In the intervening period, and you can see that we do rely very much on the advisory committee, and you know, we work very closely with them, and guys will be getting in touch with you very, very soon about the next one. So Phil then retired and is currently in Chile, leaving the three of us plus two really, really important additions who have joined us down the years. Jim Wallman, most of you I'm sure will know, expert in mega games and many other game designs, absolutely world-class standing. And he started off running our mega games and then very quickly just has so much to add that he became part of the organizing committee. And then really important, Kira Bentley, who is our champion for social responsibility and will be leading on things like diversity and inclusion in our forthcoming conference. So that's enough by way of background. What the next question that Matt asked us to look at was our contribution to defense. Right, really interesting question. Without a shadow, the most important contribution to defense that we Connections and these people have made is this. That is the MOD Wargaming Handbook. Hopefully you're familiar with it. If not, download it. It's free online. Just Google those things, MOD Wargaming Handbook. And Tom Mowat, who works at the Defence Academy, you can see on the screen there, engineered this through, you can see on the bottom of the book, the Development Concepts and Doctrine Centre, DCDC. And funny old thing, the same people who run Connections UK wrote that handbook. Colin and myself were the lead authors, Tom and Phil Sabin doing all the reviews and scrubbing and just making it good. So Connections UK, same people that wrote the Wargaming Handbook. And that, I think, is our single greatest contribution to defense wargaming. Beyond that, I hate to say it, but not so much. And we are always pushing for more military and government participation at Connections. And it is, dare I say it, fleeting. And you might get senior officers pop up. Wargaming is a great thing. We never see them again. So there is a way to go in terms of convincing the defense community that they really need to work with us. In terms of Matt's next question was contribution to the UK wargaming community. I'd like to think, but it's not the case, that actually Connections UK is very closely correlated to the UK wargaming community, but I keep on meeting new people doing really good stuff, and I say, how can you not have heard of Connections? Come on, guys, come on in. So we are gradually increasing our footprint. I would, like I said, like to think that at some stage the correlation between us and the wargaming community, including the recreational, including obviously well beyond the military, including academia and comes together. But there is something to be said for Connections UK is almost the wargaming community, but not quite. And certainly we have an awful lot to learn, and the more people that join us, the better. So that's those points covered off. Matt also asked us to talk about our typical agenda. And sorry, Matt, I don't want to do that, because that's what you guys know and love. That's typical of these conferences, and you can find it on our website. What I would like to talk about is our typical next forthcoming agenda. So that takes me actually to the bit I wanted to get to, 6 minutes in, which is our next conference. And this obviously to us is really, really important for reasons that I'm now going to bore you with for the next 3 or 4 minutes. Firstly, you can see the dates, 14-16 September. It will absolutely be online, but there will, top right of the slide, there will be a command center, which will be manned by the hoods that you've just seen named on the previous slide. And this, we're going to try and move things forward as we're all doing. So per the mission statement that we put up, we are going to advance and preserve, but we are going to focus very much, or as much as we can, sorry, on the preserving of the community. And you'll see those 2 bullets, the learning by doing and the community building. We have across the years, I think, with Connections UK, done too much actually of the advancing and not enough of the preserving the art, science and application of wargaming. So we're going to rebalance, but we are still obviously going to play lots of games. So that learning by doing is critical, and everything we are going to be doing in September will be participatory. And there is not going to be so much by way of presentations. We've got 2 or 3 central comings together where activity will stop and we will come together in order to do the community building stuff. But apart from that, everything is going to be hands-on, virtually, and learning by doing. And that participatory nature is critical. There will be games up the yin yang. There will be deep dives, there will be workshops and so on and so forth. But everything, the guidance to those people running them was they have to be participatory. So less talking heads, more hands-on doing. So in probably about a week or two, once the dust has settled from Connections Online, you will all get, I hope, and our community will get a call for action, not a call for papers, a call for action to request. So very much a scattergun approach to request games to be run in September online. And they will be, we're going to put out a bit of a targeted ask. So they will, for example, be, please come and run a game which is a short to run game for educational purposes, linked to what Seb Bay was saying the other day. Come and show us a game which is going to encourage cross-government participation. Come and show us a game for use in academia. Come, and all the games will need to be large, i.e. 5, 20 plus. So we don't want 2 people games. We want lots of games. People come to show us games which then veer into demonstrations, how to do wargaming online, that sort of thing. Innovations and novel ideas, please come and show us. And I mentioned that last, the novel ideas, because one of the basic premises of our conference is that it has to be, it will be a safe to fail environment. So people, you guys, other people can come and experiment. You can do whatever you like within the community and just try things out. So that can be experiments of war games. So if you want to come and play test something, that's absolutely fine. If you just want to develop something, then come and do it along the guidelines that we'll send out. So that is experimentations of war games, but also critically, if anyone wants to do this, experimentation into wargaming. So connect to Una's point yesterday, we don't know how effective this stuff is. We know we do lots of war games, we say they're great, but we do not know the science behind how effective they are. So if people want to use this opportunity, and we're hoping, wet finger in the air, we have 300 face-to-face. This is potentially limitless. If we get 200, I'll be pleased. But there could be a lot of people, and if people want to run organized experiments into wargaming, that is fantastic. All of this in a safe-to-fail environment. And then that community building, very quickly, that is critical because all the people on the slide so far are old, I'm afraid. Colin, not so much, but the rest of us, I'm afraid, are old. We have to preserve, we have to bring on the next generation, we have to deal with D&I, diversity and inclusion. So you've already seen Kira's name, Kira Bentley, on one of the first slides. She will be leading on the diversity and inclusion, and we have to actually address the issue, because as we all know, it isn't an issue. So we will be addressing that, and we will be building the next generation. So those who are going to come to Connections and run games, show games, we're hoping to introduce mentoring, a kind of a tag team. So yes, come and run games. And if you're relatively new, or if you've just got an idea you want to do, you can do that. But the more experienced of us will be asked to mentor and bring people on. And that includes facilitation, game design, so on and so forth. And all of that learning by doing is really building on one of the strengths of Connections UK, which those who have been will know as the Games Fair. And we used to do a half-day games fair. It's now going to be 3 days of gaming. There will be a small cost because we are hiring a command center such as that you can see, and we're hiring in technical staff. So we do have to cover that, but it'll be small. It'll be a couple of tens of dollars, something like that, not very much. And we're hoping finally that tickets go online in about June time. So you will get this call for action soon. Final point. Matt, I think, was going to ask us why you should come, because you're gonna have fun. You will have lots of fun and you will learn a lot having fun, playing games for 3 days. And the key premise is learning by doing in a safe to fail environment. That's Connections UK. Thank you.
Outstanding. Great work and great time management. Okay, let's just to maximize time for Q&A, go to Swen quickly. When people think of world powers, they don't necessarily think of the Netherlands, at least not in the last century or two. I'm originally from New York City, so I have a soft spot in my head for the Netherlands. I think a lot of what's dynamic and successful about the United States is because of all that we've learned from the Dutch, as they New Amsterdam was some country or another. I don't remember which one, kind of caused it to be converted to New York. But I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at one of the Connections Netherlands, and it really was impressive in so many ways. They would use Meeden 100-year-old forts, and they would conduct a lot of their business in English, and they brought in many students. And one of the things I was not aware of is that the Netherlands is very successful in attracting students from all over the world, and we had a very diverse and very large representation from their student body at the Connections Conference. So instead of having me talk about Connections Netherlands, Swen, you're on. Please, okay. You talk about it.
Thank you for your introductions, Matt. Merle, showing Connections North. Could you please? Yes, thank you. Well, the importance from this slide is the link to our website, Connections Netherlands NL. And I'm going to talk about Connections NL, obviously, but it's a story from my perspective, and I wanted to tell you about my perspective and then tell the story about Connections NL. And how I look at Connections is from the standpoint of sometimes philosophy of science and technology. And the reason is that it's a study that studies the breakthrough in science and technology. And a critical part of every theory about the development of science and technology comes down to essentially a foundation of critical and constructive dialogue. So every great invention or scientific breakthrough has its origins in constructively shaping the technology, critical constructive dialogue amongst the shareholders in a certain topic, together shaping the technology and science. In this respect, I would like to comment especially also Ed McGrady and Stephen Downs-Martin, because they are not only inviting us to write papers, but they're actively encouraging, criticizing, have a critical interaction and constructive interaction about each other's work, so collectively shaping the papers. Another point is that there are various tools to support this constructive dialogue. One of the most well-known is the scenario by Shell, who uses them for forecasting. But there is an even more and better tool to support the constructive dialogue, and that is wargaming itself. So wargaming, as Graham just mentioned, learning about wargaming is learning by doing. But it's also, playing the wargames is also a good way to share the knowledge about wargaming. So what I would like to do, of what we would like to do in the Netherlands also, is more wargaming. And I was happy to hear Graham speak, to take time to discuss wargaming and to invite people to mentor others into wargaming, because it is learning by doing, but it is also constructively sharing ideas about wargaming, which means listening also listening to each other and expanding upon that. Right, that's enough for my perspective, but it's all about connections. Right, Connections NL started already in 2011, and the first connection in the Netherlands made was between me and Hans Steensma, and we made a connection in 2011 because we wanted to commemorate 200 years of modern wargaming, an anniversary of 2 centuries of wargaming that we would not want to pass by without notice. So our first wargaming conference was organized in 2011, and we invited John Curry to come and tell us about wargaming. It was a great experience, and that was all for a little while until the United Kingdom organized Connections UK. For us, it was a small step to cross the North Sea and join Connections UK. And it was a wonderful experience to be amongst fellow wargamers and to meet Matt, to meet Peter, Phil, Graham, and others. So on the way back, Hans and I discussed that we should do this in the Netherlands as well. And we wanted to advance the state of the art in the Netherlands. So in 2014, we trialed a next wargaming seminar in the Netherlands to see if we could invite enough participants. And well, we're still here, so it was a success. And in 2015, we had our first Connections NL, and we wanted to be part of a larger community. As Graham said and Matt, we wanted to connect to a wider audience, and we were happy to join the Connections family. I'm going to talk now a little bit about our experience and our setup. When I talked to Peter Perla at Connections UK about organizing a seminar in the Netherlands, we discussed what are key things you need to be aware of and how can you make it a success. One of the things was to invite top key speakers, and we did. Matt told you we invited Matt, Caffrey, Peter Perla, Jim Woolman, Tom Mowat, Oliver Swartz, and of course we already had John Curry. And it was great to have them with us, not just as a kind of marketing tool, but what was great to see and very good, very effective, was that each of these experts was available to enter in discussions with our participants. So effectively, they could come up to them and talk about wargaming, kind of master-apprentice relationship. But that was a critical part of our success. And Connections is not a one-way street. It's at least a two-way street, and we not only invited people, but also people from the Netherlands are going abroad discussing wargaming. Erik Elgersma went to the United States to the Center of Naval Analysis, and Anja van der Hulst has been presenting at Connections North. What's also worth mentioning is that there are also studies being done, and at least one PhD student has been made about wargaming by Natalia Wojciowicz, if I pronounce her name correctly. And at the moment, there is also another Dutch woman in this case doing a PhD on wargaming at King's College. So we have a crossover in knowledge in this way, and we're also reaching out to the Connections, or in even Wargaming conference in Paris and Wargaming in Germany by the German Heer, or German army. What's also, next slide please. A critical part of the Netherlands is the venue. We are fortunate, you could say, that we have still have historical buildings, and especially our historical fortifications from our water defenses are very good locations to hold a wargaming conference. And the ambience or the sphere is very conducive for these kinds of seminars. I think it's also worth mention and important that we are not just looking to the military, but actively invite people from business and from academia, education, and lower and higher government, because we want to include as many people as possible from as many perspectives as possible, because we see that as the only way forward in really advancing the state of wargaming by how do you call it, a synergy of all these perspectives. The success is also due to the participants themselves. That we notice that there are more and more returning participants who are also willing to support the activities of Connections in one way or another. And we also have a growing number of participants who join, not always present, but want to be kept in the loop about what is happening with wargaming. So that's going better than expected. And each year we have 60 to 80 participants, which is quite well for a country as the Netherlands. And we do not necessarily want to become much bigger, because we want to focus on the interactions, and 60 to 80 people it's easy to connect to everyone present. Talking about connections, it's also, I think, important to note that we have a good connection or relation to SAGANET. And SAGANET is a Dutch chapter of the international organization, International Simulation and Gaming Association. You could say the civilian counterpart of Connections. And the good thing about it is that SAGANET is in the Netherlands a collection of gaming experts from academia and business, and it's quite fun to share knowledge about wargaming or gaming in general, and they support us doing Connections. About our setup, mostly. The Netherlands is a relatively small country. You can drive through it in 2 hours, north to south or east to west, more or less. And is a country with a high density of gamers. Even so, when we organize a day, the people mostly go home afterwards. Thus, it is rather difficult for us to come up with an idea for a multiple day wargaming event. So, though we are trying to seek opportunities to do so, because like Graham said, we need to do more wargaming, not just as a way to learn wargaming, but because wargaming is an excellent vehicle to share knowledge about wargaming. One thing that we should look into more is, I believe, also the history of wargaming. What I didn't know in 2011 but do now is that in 1811 there was also a Dutchman, Lieutenant Colonel Messner of the Netherlands Army Engineer Corps, who introduced a wargame into the Netherlands. And apart from the wargame itself, what struck me was that he already knew about other wargaming events, even though there is no internet or no radio. And he was talking about wargaming as a tool that's not reality, but provided insight into reality and should be played as this. So it was just like reading stuff by Jim Dunnigan or Peter Perla or Matt Caffrey already in 2011. The point is that we often use wargaming to learn more about history, but I think we could be more serious to use history to learn more about wargaming. As a point, I told you Netherlands is a country with high density with professionals, which is kind of fun because there are many people to talk about gaming. Although one of the problems is we do not really talk that much to each other. In about, you could see in about 2010 an explosion of serious gaming. But what we notice is that everybody is focused on its own type of form of wargaming, serious gaming, and not really interested or open to enter in a dialogue about the fundamentals of gaming and the principles and the tools you could use to better explain and employ games. And we are seeking ways to improve that situation, but it's not easy. We haven't found the solution yet. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, show the next slide, please. Just showing some slides that connects the Netherlands is still a combination of speakers and gaming. Usually we have a speaker early in the morning, then a game carousel in the afternoon. And what is important, we also include you could call it a happy hour, and especially so that people can meet and discuss things, not just the wargaming experience they had today, but also look forward that events or activities they could deploy together after connections. Made us our contribution to the Netherlands defense. An important contribution is just to be Connections NL, to be a platform to invite military officers interested in wargaming, to have a platform to share knowledge and to learn about wargaming and to improve their skills. And that's not just a passive activity. We are actively, well, recruiting is too strong word, but we are actively seeking people who are engaged in wargaming and see if we can include them in our community. One of the success stories is that in 2017 we invited a couple of ensigns of the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps to come to Connections and build a game together. They indeed built a game which was hosted in the naval base of Den Helder, and it was a beautiful story which in short was about a Russian attack on the naval base in Den Helder, simulated, which was executed perfectly by the ensigns. And the bottom line of the story was the assault on the naval base was the result of a Dutch Marine oogling a wife of a Russian admiral who didn't like that and thus attacked the naval base in Den Helder. I mention this because in 2020, when we did Connections NL online in the Netherlands, that one of those ensigns who was had become a lieutenant, also was on board to do his presentation on wargaming for the Netherlands Marine Corps. What I found beautiful and very good to note is that when I started talking to him, he showed me 3D printed military units he used in the war game. And he was telling about the war game. And I knew it was just like listening to the words of Jim Dunnigan, Peter Perla. He knew what he was doing. And I got the feeling like the student surpasses the master, if you know what I mean. That this young officer who was invited in 2017 was running war games in 2020 and not doing it what I often encountered, and Graham also mentioned, in the last 30 years, but really wargaming. And the way he showed the tools, he owned the game. He wasn't not just an officer, he owned it. To put it in perspective, and then I'll close my speech, is that when I encountered a commander of a simulation center in the Netherlands, he also showed me military plastic representation of military units he used during operations, but he was very shy talking about it. And he was a commander of a simulation center, shy about talking about wargaming. In 2020, we had this young lieutenant who was not shy about. He owned wargaming. He was wargaming, and you could feel it. That it's difficult to express, but he was going as he should be going, wargaming as he should be wargaming. And there's lots more to say, but I guess I captured the essence of Connections NL, and we're going. That's important. We are holding our next Connection NL in November, and hopefully we're going to go into kind of hybrid where we can meet live as well as host online presentations and gaming. We'll keep you informed. For now, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining Connections.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to have our cleanup batter from the great nation of Canada. I really think we in the United States are blessed to have Canada as our neighbor. There's a joke that I've heard occasionally in the U.S. military. If you really want to keep something secret, put the Canadians in charge of it, because nobody will ever have heard of it. And it embarrasses me how many Americans don't know that one of the beaches at Normandy was a Canadian beach, and how the Canadians had the largest number of keels supporting the convoys across the North Atlantic, and all the contributions they've made over the years. And Rex and his crew are making contributions to wargaming that I think are distinct and very important, and they're wargaming in areas beyond kinetics that I think may well be the leaders in the world. So would much want to have Rex talk about all they've achieved and all they're going to achieve, much more so than myself. So Rex, you're on.
Thank you. So if someone wants to let me know when those slides are up. Very good. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about Connections North. Connections North was first convened in Ottawa in 2016. We've been having it annually at McGill University here in Montreal since 2018, although, as I'll say in a minute, the pandemic changed all of that. There's a number of us who work on it. Brynen from the Canadian Joint Warfare Centre, Ben Taylor from Defence Research and Development Canada, Madeline Johnson, who's from Global Affairs Canada, so our State Department, as it were. Brian Train, who we've cloned, which is why he's able to produce so many innovative game designs each year. Tom Fisher from Imaginetic, and myself. Normally, we've been running it at McGill each year in February, which is just a lovely time of year here in Montreal. And we usually pair it with the McGill Mega Game the next day, which is a large mega game, not on a super serious topic, although it's usually an aid to civil powers or a stabilization theme, but it's largely held for students, but a lot of the people coming to the conference play in it as well. In 2019, I guess we ran the unrealistic scenario of an out-of-control pandemic south of the border. It also gave rise to my favorite ever Stephen Downes Martin story, but no, Stephen, I won't tell it here. You can tell it in the chat if you want. Obviously, with the pandemic, we went online this February, 2.5 days via Zoom. For those of you who keep asking me, yes, the videos will be posted, but poor Tom Fisher's in the process of moving house, so it's been slowed a bit. We also, I believe, we're the only member of the Connections family with our own mascot, Smuggy the Beaver, who started as a symbol for smug Canadian self-righteousness as a game currency, but we have stuck with them ever since. Although it was proposed at the last Connections North that Connections UK adopt Jim Wallman as a mascot. The digital version, so this year's version of Connections North, we had over 400 registrants, about 100 people attending any one online session. 31% Canadian, a third American, 15% from the UK, and then the rest from elsewhere. 38% of the program and 18% of the registrants were women. And I'll return to that issue in a minute, because there's a number of sort of connections related themes I wanted to put on the table for broader discussion. One of the challenges we face in organizing Connections North is how not to make it like every other Connections, which is not to say that there is anything wrong with all of the other Connections. They're all great. I've been to all of them apart from Connections Netherlands, which I haven't been to in person. I've seen it's part of the digital version. But how can we make it so that it's somehow distinct and is speaking to a Canadian audience? Because obviously one of the purposes of the conference is to try and grow wargaming and serious gaming in Canada. And so there's a number of ways we've done that. As Matt suggested, we're more of a wargaming conference than a wargaming conference. That is to say, wargaming is an important part of our program, but we talk about the application of serious games to other things. Most of them are sort of defense and national security, foreign policy adjacent, but a lot of all of government issues, Arctic security, last conference, fisheries conservation, gaming in the humanitarian and development sector, biosecurity, African swine fever, some great gaming that Agriculture Canada had done. We're also interested in gaming in smaller countries, because much of the wargaming discussion is driven by the US and the UK to a lesser extent. And that's really, really absolutely key seminal material in our field. But we have different challenges. We have essentially two small nodes of defense wargaming in Canada at the wargaming cell at the Canadian Joint Warfare Centre and at DRDC. And I noticed at least one of each person in the Discord conversation, because David Redpath from JWIC is there and Murray Dixon from DRDC are there, possibly some others I didn't notice. We have one person at Global Affairs Canada who's become a real sort of advocate of gaming across government departments. There's now a wargaming course at the Canadian Forces College, but you know, the defense wargaming community in Canada would comfortably fit around my basement wargaming table, and a fair portion of them have at one time or another. So we're dealing with much smaller defense and wargaming communities. We're also sometimes dealing with other kinds of issues, and I use un-American in quotes here because I'm not being serious, but there are issues which come up in terms of resources and in terms of issues which are different for smaller wargamers like Canada or the Netherlands or Australia than they are for the much larger defense community. I mean, the new Marine Wargaming Center will have multiple times more wargamers in it than probably exist across the entirety of the Canadian Armed Forces and the broader Department of National Defense, for example. There's also sometimes other ways in which our perspectives differ. It's interesting talking about Arctic gaming, that for us in some ways, although we don't talk about it too much, the US might be red, since on territorial waters issues, we're more closely aligned with the Russians and the Chinese on a lot of sea issues than sometimes we are with the US Navy. So sometimes there are other ways in which our perspectives might be a bit different. So we've tried to balance having things of broader and general interest for the entire wargaming community with things that might speak to particular Canadian audiences or other countries that are doing wargaming with smaller defense communities. I wanted to throw some issues out rather than just talk about what we've done, which I think all of us in the Connections community and those of you who are listening at home can usefully address. One of those, which certainly was mentioned by Graham, was how to best carry forth diversity and inclusion issues in wargaming. The Darby House Principles has been an important part of that. They were really born at a discussion a couple of years ago at Connections North, an immediate follow-up from Connections UK and along at the Women's Wargaming Network, and working together and putting together the Darby House Principles. And we've been very happy with their wide endorsement across the Connections community and sort of defense wargaming communities. But how do we make that something more than a logo and a name? And not all Connections conferences have done a terrific job of actually making sure that historically underrepresented groups are represented well on their programs. I will praise Connections UK, who actually have a social responsibility, diversity and inclusion officer and have built it into their program design from the very beginning, and in that respect, they are leaders in doing so. But how can it become something more than just words on a page or logos or pins, or whichever side I've got my pin on? Here it is. I still have some Darby House pins for those of you who are interested. Second issue we might talk about is how do we reach out to broader groups? There's a massive digital gaming, including digital serious gaming community that we almost never see at Connections conferences, although it's huge and international and so forth. Researchers, including researchers in adjacent fields, social sciences, psychology, these are issues that I think where we could make more progress in bringing in insights that support our wargaming. Wargaming is a social activity. There are lots of people. Stephen Downes Martin has been banging this drum for a long time, who specialize in group dynamics and decision making and analysis and how that all works, that we need more of. And how do we reach out to non-defense communities to grow what serious gaming, whether for capacity building, training, education purposes, or for analytical purposes? How do we reach out to broader groups in that regard? I think we've done fairly well in Canada, but that's kind of making a virtue out of necessity because our gaming community is so small. And I've noticed this in other aspects. Having worked in the Canadian government in the foreign policy, defense, and intelligence fields, that because our bench is much smaller, we tend to reach across to other benches and other government departments more easily, simply in order to make up the numbers, and that has certain advantages. How do we all do conference delivery in the future? There's lots of advantages to digital delivery. You can bring in much more international audiences and so on and so forth. you do in person? Do we all go back to in person? Do we have some sort of future hybrid where conferences are partly in person and partly online? There's issues of archiving. We do have to get our videos up, but they will be up eventually. Don't worry about it. And then there is the danger of conference overload. I mean, I don't know about you, but I simply cannot attend all the online wargaming events that there are right now, partly due to all the connections conferences, but the amazing work that Sebastian and the students at Goose at the Georgetown University Wargaming Society are doing and putting stuff out almost every week. There's stuff coming out from King's College London. There's stuff coming out from Moores. There is a danger of overload, and maybe one way of countering that is to make sure that we're pushing frontiers and bringing in new stuff and new perspectives and so forth, and not retreading the same ground. Here in Canada, the challenge, we haven't talked about it yet, we won't until the fall, is what we do for next year post-pandemic, both in terms of in-person. We'll certainly go partly back to in-person, but possibly some hybrid delivery. Also, for us, it's always a challenge where to hold it. There are advantages holding it at McGill. It's easy for me to organize at the university. We've got terrific conference facilities for it. And we get a lot of students coming, and those students go on to do serious gaming after graduation. We've got Brynen Proseviat, who I mentioned before, is one of our former students. But it's in Montreal. It's not in Ottawa, where the center of the federal government is. We can run it in Ottawa. We will get less of the new generation. I mean, it will in practice be harder to get students there, although there are universities in Ottawa too. But we will get more federal government folks who will come rather than taking the 2-hour drive down to Montreal. Plus, of course, we've got significant defense communities on the two coasts, in Esquimalt on the west coast and in Halifax on the east coast, who we don't see at all. So do we want to move it out of the kind of Montreal, Ottawa, maybe Kingston, Toronto triangle? That's triangle with 4 points there, into the rest of Canada, or not, because I don't think we get the turnout if we ran it on the west or the east coast. But maybe hybrid delivery is a way of doing that, or having a conference in multiple places with digital in person, but with digital connections. But we haven't worked any of that out. I'm just throwing those issues out. And other connections conferences always deal with the where should we hold it, particularly in larger countries. If you're in the Netherlands, nothing's more than 2 hours away, and the train service is outstanding. That's not necessarily true if you're organizing conferences in North America or Australia. So that was literally all I wanted to say about Connections North. You'll eventually find out how we're going to run it. Next year, it'll probably be in February again. I have a particular preference for that because I teach my conflict simulation course in that term, which means I've got 40-odd interested students. But I think there's some broader issues that we might usefully discuss, and might usefully discuss in the Discord channel, about moving forward on all of those things. You know, growing the community, reaching out, diversity and inclusion, delivery methods, making sure we're not retreading the same ground, and so on and so forth. But that's all I had to say.
That's great. Well, we still have 7 minutes for some question and answer. Merle, anything to pass on to our panelists? Okay. Did Connections USK prompt the revitalization of wargaming at Sandhurst, or was that a Phil Neeson initiative? Or I guess I could ask both. Graham?
Okay, to answer the questions, yes and no. So the revitalization, that word, of wargaming at Sandhurst, that was, as so many things, a bottom-up individual effort. The likes of Ed Farron, Tom Moat were driving that. I thought it was Paul Nansen, might be wrong. General Paul Nansen is one of those who very kindly came to talk to our conference and did a really, really good job not seen subsequently. So I suspect, as with so many things in our wargaming community, it is the small group of determined men and women driving things from the bottom as enthusiasts, rather than any kind of coordinated top-down effort. So I don't think it was Connections UK per se, but it was certainly people that we know very well driving it from the bottom.
Okay, very good. Does UK organization support Fight Club?
Absolutely fantastic. So,
and do you want to say a word or two about Fight Club, because I'm not sure everybody knows about it?
Okay, I can, but I am not Fight Club. So we work. I would like to work more closely. I've just mentioned Ed Farron. Andrew Elliott from DSTL is one of the founders, Arnel and Alex Willeman from the Netherlands. So we are hoping, and we've already spoken to them, that there will be an absolutely coordinated effort at Connections UK in September, where Mission Command is going to be rampant, and we will be opening up the virtual floor, and we are hoping and expecting that Fight Club will step up to that virtual plate and do whatever they want to do in terms of Fight Club activities. But I am not Fight Club, so I'm very nervous of speaking to what they are doing, because I think they are doing fantastic things, and I haven't got a link to the website and the rest of it, or the Slack site, but I'm sure people can go out and find it. All I would say is they are doing lots of really good experimentation, basically pushing out where they can laptops and computers to the home audience and getting people to do experimentation in a kind of controlled way. I don't want to say more than that because I'll get it wrong, so I'll shut up.
Okay, and they've impressed us on this side of the Atlantic. Cool. There's been a number of briefings over here about it, and people are looking at, are there things we can do within the U.S. that could recreate some of the value? So good stuff. Okay, can you talk about how Connections NL has linked to the business gaming?
Yes, I can. Thank you. It's a two-way part, actually. We invite several members of the business consultancy business joining Connections, and we have seen several games being run outside of Connections by people who met at Connections. So Connections is a venue for people meeting, exchange ideas, but also to come together to execute games during the year. Also, a couple of participants of Connections are hosting games just as an introductory to business and organizations. Just part to show them wargaming, introduce them to wargaming, and part of helping them solve a problem. So we're actively supporting wargaming in business.
Excellent. And the next question is? Oh, okay. The next statement is, so we ran through all the questions. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody. I also want to thank Merle Robinson, because she's the guy behind the counter that got
Yes.
curtain that got us all set up. So thank you, Merle. And I think everything in the world is ground up. All these different Connections conferences, including ours, started with a few people that wanted to make a difference. And there's been so much benefit to so many nations. If you're one of the values of this online wargaming is that it's much easier, or conferencing, it's much easier for people from other countries to log in and take a look. If you're in a country that doesn't have a Connections conference yet, please email me. We are not. We feel a family that wargames together stays together, and the stronger each of us are, the stronger all of us are. So anything we can do to spread the word even further would be a wonderful thing. So that's all I have. Merle, I'll turn 2 minutes back over to the conference.